welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we have gotten the first wave of NBA free agency action on the books already, but there are still some notable names that are out there on the open market that are going to be interesting to see where they end up, and the main ones I'm looking at are DeMar DeRozan and Lauri Markkanen. So we'll start with DeRozan here. We just talked about the Lakers, and that was seeming like it was going to be an option for a while, that LeBron could take a pay cut for DeMar and they could both play in LA next season. But now that LeBron has taken this max contract extension, that is off the table. I keep saying extension. It's not an extension. He was a free agent. It's just a contract. So that's just a note for myself. But DeMar doesn't seem to have the Lakers as an option anymore, so it leads to a couple different teams of where he could potentially end up. So the rumors that we've been hearing, the Miami Heat at one point were the front runner to go out and get him. They were emerging as the favorites. Now, the Heat are handicapped a little bit financially and would likely have to work out some sort of a sign and trade situation. And that's something that it sounds like there is a little bit of hesitancy from Miami and their front office group in terms of what are they willing to actually give up for DeMar DeRozan. So that is at least something to consider here. DeMar would be, I'd say, a pretty good fit in Miami. I mean, I don't think it elevates the Heat to this next level, but I talked about this last year as well during the season, is the fact that it's been very clear, especially as much as nobody wants to give him credit and the playoffs were terrible for him, but Tyler Hero, the reason why he is an important part of this Heat team is because of the fact that, for the most part, outside of Jimmy Butler, I don't know how many guys there are on that roster who can just go get you a bucket out of isolation. And they traded for Terry Rozier, who I expect to be a better fit in Miami in year 2 after being a trade deadline acquisition. So that'll definitely help. We'll see. I mean, I'm assuming Tyler Hero. I don't know how much he is actually going to... I can't imagine his value is very high, so I think he's probably going to be there. And Jimmy Butler, you assume if he's healthy, he's going to be able to play it out there. So that's probably an issue the Heat won't have next season, at least knock on wood, if everybody's healthy. But it is an interesting conversation in terms of, you can always use another guy who can go get you a bucket. I think that DeRozan is also a little bit of an underrated playmaker, and just his overall IQ. I saw it last year with Chicago. I thought he became a pretty good mentor. At least, I'm not in the building or anything, but you look at some of these close games where it seemed like the Bulls were at the top of the league. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but they were at the top of the league in terms of clutch games played. And in large part, it was because DeRozan was just keeping this pretty, I wouldn't even say mediocre. I'd say his subpar Bulls team kind of in these types of games. And, the Heat wouldn't be worse off with DeRozan, but again, if you have to move all of these pieces for him, I do have a little bit more concerns. And it's kind of a similar situation for the Sacramento Kings, who are also a stealth candidate according to Zach Lowe of ESPN, and what he could possibly provide for the Kings, who missed the playoffs last year, were a first-round exit in 2023, and you feel pretty good about their core in terms of, you're also looking at the Kings, who had previously, before that 2023 playoff berth, had the longest playoff drought in the NBA, and it's great to see them back into a form of relevancy, but the Western Conference is extremely deep, and it could definitely be difficult for the Kings to overcome some of the teams that are ahead of them. And I do think that, on any given day, DeMar DeRozan does make them better. I actually do really like the fit of him in Sacramento. The issue is that they are over the salary cap currently, and they would also have to pull off a sign and trade to make this work. Now, there have been reports, at least, that the Kings have been a little bit more willing to maybe make some moves. They've at least been shopping Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter. Not totally sure what the value would look like in terms of DeMar DeRozan versus, I'd say specifically Kevin Huerter, because there's also reports that the Bulls are fans of Kevin Huerter. I'd like that fit actually a lot in Chicago. Again, I've been pulling for them to actually lean into this idea of rebuilding, and I feel like that would be a little bit of a win-win if it were Kevin Huerter for DeMar DeRozan. Again, I'm not exactly sure what that would look like in terms of the value of these assets. It's a better but older DeMar DeRozan versus a 25-year-old Kevin Huerter who doesn't have superstar potential, but, was a young player at 25 years old and is going to continue to be better and be in the league for a while. So I'd say that overall they're pretty comparable. Maybe some second-round picks are swapped along the way, but I think that's the framework of a trade that could be a win-win for everybody involved. And I that's kind of where I'm hoping that we see a move like that. There is still the possibility of him going back to the Bulls. Now, it sounds like the trade that they made of Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey is something that kind of told DeRozan the direction that they felt like they were headed, or at least that, that trade, let me rephrase, told DeMar DeRozan the way that the Bulls kind of viewed themselves and what they're expecting for years to come, which is not being a contender, that they've sort of been hovering, grasping onto that idea because of a successful start to the, 21-22 season when they first got Lonzo and Caruso and DeRozan and was putting that team all together. So I highly doubt at this point that DeRozan's going to go back. Now, if the market isn't there, would he be willing to re-sign with Chicago? I think that that's probably worst case scenario for everybody because it's going to keep the Bulls in being in a place where they're better than they should be. It's going to be DeRozan, again, wasting his years, because I looked at those Bulls games. I wanted Kobe White to have his, experience and his growth and such, but I also was looking at DeMar DeRozan, who I was just like, he's way too good for this organization right now. So we'll see about that. But the other hot name in at least around free agency has been Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz. In my opinion, if the Jazz end up trading him, that could be potentially the most impactful player movement of heading into next season in terms of the actual results. And, Markkanen was the most improved player in 2023 at his first ever All-Star appearance. He was in the conversation for being in the All-Star game again last year, but with how deep the West is and being on a subpar team, overall the talent in the West was just too much for Markkanen to make it again. But he's been extremely promising since coming to Utah. They got him in the Donovan Mitchell trade, and there has been, I'd say, a lot of speculation over you could even go back maybe even a year, I'd say, especially around the trade deadline and now this offseason, about the potential of Markkanen being moved. Now, Danny Ainge is the general manager there in Utah. If you are familiar with what Ainge does, he sort of operates on his own wavelength in terms of he's not definitively committing to a rebuild or being all in. He's just going to make the best possible move at any moment. And Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports spoke about the situation yesterday, and he described the Jazz's strategy as, quote, conducting their business with a 10% chance they're going to move him. So they're not desperate by any means, but they are also very willing to make a move here. And Fisher did say that the Kings were potentially close to pulling off a deal with the Jazz for Markkanen. I like that the Kings are being aggressive here, but knowing Ainge, it's going to be a pretty heavy price, you would have to imagine. And I think that ultimately, when you look at what a trade package could be of Markkanen to the Kings, as opposed to DeRozan, where there's pretty much no leverage and you're talking about a free agent, Markkanen has about a year or so left on his deal. I can actually double check right now as we go on here in terms of what's left on his deal. I want to say he has something like a player option next offseason. Again, I'll have the definitive answer on that in just a moment, but there's definitely more leverage that the Jazz have in this type of a situation where they're probably going to be asking for at least one young piece in Keegan Murray is probably the most likely candidate. So Markkanen actually is going into the final year of his contract, which does make this, I think it's really interesting, the philosophy of Danny Ainge and what the Jazz are going to do here, because they will, I would have to imagine, have the opportunity to pay Markkanen the most amount of money next offseason. It seems like he likes it there, and when you're talking about a mid-major or a mid-market team or franchise in the Utah Jazz, it's not a bad deal to have necessarily, and just try and hold on to whatever star-adjacent talent there is in the NBA, but I don't know. We'll have to see about that one. I'm definitely leaning towards, I hope the Jazz do make a move here, but you just can't really expect Danny Ainge to do the traditional thing in terms of these trade conversations. But there are some other teams that have been involved on the conversation. The Golden State Warriors and the San Antonio Spurs both. The Warriors are probably I would have to imagine, Ainge's favorite trade partner in terms of the fact that he loves his first round picks, and if he could get some Golden State first round picks years down the line where you maybe either have a diminished version of Steph Curry or no Steph Curry, that the Jazz could talk themselves into having a trade package built around that, maybe some of the younger players as well that the Warriors currently have on their roster. So that's an interesting one to monitor. I don't see it with the Spurs. Now, you have people in the national media talking about Wemby wants to win now and that they have to, build up this roster to help them compete. The Spurs just aren't that close yet, and making a panic trade isn't going to do anything for them. So I want them to just stay the course. I like the moves that they made this offseason. I want them to continue. And now that I'm thinking about it, I totally should have put the Spurs as one of my winners in free agency as well, just for the Chris Paul signing to help develop Wembanyama and Stephon Castle. But, regardless, I'm calling them a winner right now, and I think that they just need to stay where they currently are. And I'm not sure how this plays out. Ainge isn't going to move him if he doesn't have a deal that he thinks is great for the Jazz. So we'll see. Again, even if Lauri is under contract long-term with the Jazz, he really doesn't fit in with a timeline of when the Jazz would be ready. But again, like I've reiterated a couple times here, Danny Ainge isn't really one for the structure of timelines anyways. So let me know what you think in the comment section. I especially think the Markkanen deal and this saga that's going on is particularly interesting. So we will continue to give you updates on that, but what I want to do now is actually go back at the 2023 offseason and sort of regrade the moves that went down, because there were a couple big time splashes. Of course, Damian Lillard to the Bucks, Drew Holiday to the Celtics. So all of that I want to dive into and look at it from the perspectives of all teams involved. So we're going to be diving into all of that, but first, have to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.